Radwan, for organizing this event, and for Andrew for writing this really impressive book. I went through this week, so I found a lot of interesting points, and I'll come to that. But first, I should say that Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi is really, for me, one of the intellectual pioneers, of my own thought. In my 20s, when I was really young and more hardline, I can say, I had read Sayyid Qutb, Yoldaki İşaretler, or the signpost, and as many young, Muslims who are into Islamic, world we did those days. And Sayyid Qutb was very influential in Turkey. But then came Rashid Ghannouchi. We learned about him in Turkey. His book, actually, Public Freedoms in the Islamic State, was translated into Turkish later, and I was deeply impressed by that. Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi certainly represents as Andrew explained, a much more developed, evolved, or progressed, if you will, whatever you call, thinking in terms of this modern political Islamic thought. On the one hand, there's Sayyid Qutb and Mawdudi, who want an Islamic state, the Sharia governed by that. And of course, there is a big emphasis on that these authoritarian rulers, secular dictators especially, are not legitimate. So there's the laws about the ruler. So that's really an important, actually, idea in classical Islam, value in classical Islam. It's there. But also then the Sharia itself come with certain impositions, right? I mean, and by modern standards. So how do you deal with that? Now, in this book, I realized that, Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi has taken really even more steps, in his thinking. And I think it should be noticed by people who think about Islam and politics. And Andrew already mentioned some of them, but I would say a few more things. For example, he notes that he reminds that there are some Islamists who think democracy is kufr, right? It's the system of the infidels. That's a hardline view. And he thinks, obviously, it's wrong. He compares to the views of Khawarij, even that, saying that God should rule, but who rules in the name of God? Ultimately, nobody rules in the name of God. So what we need is consultation among the believers, not just believers, but all citizens. So he just gets away from this and shows how it's wrong to just use the idea of divine sovereignty to negate democracy, right? There's this imagined tension between divine sovereignty and the sovereignty of the people. Divine sovereignty is a cosmic, metaphysical concept, but people are, as vicegerents of God on earth, have reason and interests and valuable and values which can be legitimately managed by shura consultation. So that's a very important point. Another thing I really found important was as Andrew said, he emphasizes Sharia as one expression of the broader eternal idea of justice. In one place, he says, for example, wherever there is justice, God's law is in force. Now, this is different from the typical Islamist thinking, which is wherever there is Sharia, that is justice. No, he says, no, wherever there is justice, that would be God's law. So which means there can be justice outside of Islam. And he actually emphasizes that. He says Western liberal democracies, despite their foreign policies, which we often criticize, rightly so, especially these days, but they might have rule of law and freedoms that we Muslims, that's why he says Muslims come to these places. And he notes that Muslims migrated to the West for freedoms, which he himself, of course, is an example. So I think that's also important. Another place is that he even emphasizes the convergence of the intentions, the maqasid of the Sharia, Islamic law, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR. And again, that's different from Mawdudi, for example, who thought there should be an Islamic version of human rights, different from the UDHR, and the Islamic version only comes from the Sharia, and it doesn't have some of the things that the UDHR would include, such as the right to change your religion or equality for women and genders and all religious groups. So there are really interesting divergences from classical thought, and I think it should be emphasized. Now, one tension still remains, and I think Andrew highlighted that nicely in the discussions with Sheikh Ghannouchi towards the end. And there is this idea of the Sharia, Islamic law, being a liberating force And on the other hand, you want to bring Sharia. I mean, one thing is that is the Sharia a liberating force? I think in terms of limiting the ruler, yes, we've seen that throughout Islamic history. Rulers could not overtax populations thanks to the Sharia, for example. Rulers could not confiscate afkaf, the foundations, and so on and so forth. But also, there are many aspects of the Sharia that will be liberating only if you believe in it. And if it was imposed onto you, if you were not willing to do that, I mean, imagine, like, for example, 5-day prayers, that's a part of the Sharia. It will be a liberating force for you if you willingly, follow these practices of Islam. But if it's imposed on you through a state, it would be an oppressive system of law. Now, here his emphasis on freedom is significant. He emphasizes again and again that Islamic laws, the requirements of Islam should be based on free choice and not by coercion. But also he speaks about still democracy somehow through constitutional courts, the Sharia being involved in the system, in the political system. Now, that is, I think, the next step that we should discuss in Islamic thought. But I do see the direction towards that in this book. For example, towards the end, Sheikh Anushi criticizes ideological states, Devla Aqadiyya, as if I'm not getting it wrong, the confessional state. And of course, he mentions examples like communist states or even French secularism, which wants to liberate people from religion with its own convictions. But he says Muslims don't have to do that. And he emphasizes the blessings of a neutral state. At least he sees the blessings for that. And that's why towards the end of the book, which I found very significant, he positively mentions and prospect of Islamic liberalism, political liberalism. And what is liberalism there? It's the neutral state, a state that is neutral towards religion in its laws, which would be, I think, it would be a full complement to the whole idea of Islamic democracy, because there is this concern that Islamic democracy or Muslim democracy, when Islamists are in power, turn illiberal. But his emphasis on the neutral state as a positive good, which he defines as Islamic liberalism, is interesting. Of course, there will still be the question, if it's a neutral state and Muslims appreciate that, what is the role of Islam? So what Islam brings? So what makes Islamic movement different than others? That's a new, I think, interesting area people who are interested in the topic should look into. What are the values of Islam? How are they articulated in the modern world without any coercive measures of the state, but accepting a neutrality of the state, but still, what do you advocate? What kind of policy you advocate? So that would be a new, I think, area to discuss. But I believe Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi already opened many avenues in Islamic thought. And I think that's why his contribution is significant. It's a shame that he's in a jail in Tunisia, unlawfully jailed, just being an opposition leader by the tyranny that is unfortunately has grasped Tunisia in the past few years. I hope to see Tunisia free again and Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi free again too.